So good evening. I was asked to do a repeat on a talk that I gave on Sunday on a Zoom meeting with women that were part of a special delegation of Kabbalah's Pnei Moshiach Tzidkenu in honor of 22Shvat. So it's not the same when you're talking to people, you're just doing a re-record, but maybe I can capture what I had said then. Hashem's help. So on that morning, Sunday morning, I actually gave a shiur over here in Los Angeles. I had a whole bunch of men, and I had made a shocking statement that kind of, caused some jitters when I told the people that I think time has come that the men start listening to the women. I really believe that. I really believe that the pathway to the Geula, the pathway to Moshiach, it's niskabel in women's neshamas and in women's psyches and women's being faster and deeper than it is by the men. And the women will, without a shadow of a doubt, be those that will lead the revolution towards Moshiach Tzidkenu. And it's happening already. So all I can say is that the women should continue and not let go. And one thing I can say to the women is that we, the men, will wake up. It's taking us a little longer, but we will wake up and we will follow. One of the fascinating things that we're seeing in the world now, the Baal Shem Tov says that everything a person sees or hears is a hayra. It's the Eibishter talking to him. Now imagine if we're hearing the same message day in and day out, and in every place in the world, and in every language in the world. What have we been hearing the last 2 years? Well, when we say hearing, I mean non-stop. There were light intervals of interruption, but mostly it was non-stop the last 2 years. And that was one thing. We're hearing about the virus, we're hearing about Corona, we're hearing about COVID-19. And obviously it's a terrible thing, and we have to, Zechayis Betna, that Eibishter should put an end to it already, and fartik. That goes without a shadow of a doubt. But if we just hear, just the idea that you're hearing this word again and again and again and again and again and again, no matter where you go, every office you visit, every place you're going, there's always a reminder: wear your mask, this, that, non-stop, all day long. All we hear is Corona, and Corona means coronation. That means that the entire world is demanding. What does the Eibishter want us to hear more than anything else? Coronation. Because Igia Hazman for the coronation of Moshiach Tzidkenu. And we need to do it, we will do it, and we are doing it. And this is what's so special about this group of delegation. It's those that are waking up early. I didn't say this the other night when I was talking to the group, but I'm saying it now. In every thing that becomes the fad, that becomes the thing that everybody gets on, it's always good to get in early. I'm not saying, obviously, we're doing these things, it's not for personal gain, but everybody knows that it's always like those who got in early. And everybody says, if only I would have bought real estate in that place. But if you come too late, crypto coins, if only I would have bought it at the beginning. If only I would have grabbed, the social media when it was just starting and I was offered. If only. Everybody has an if only. And the thing is that if we get in early, so the ultimate, obviously, everybody will coronate Melech HaMashiach, the ganze Welt. But it's a big schus for those who get in early. And there's no more time, because the coronation is happening. The ganze Welt, the whole world is screaming coronation. And even the other name that's given to it. In other words, the Eibishter wants to show us so clearly, even the other name. I think you say, okay, Corona, coronation, has a shaykhis, it doesn't have a shaykhis, who says? But the other name is COVID-19. And COVID is Malchus. Kavod Malchus Chayem Edo. There's no shaila. And if you're not sure if Kavod is Malchus, because he's still saying Kavod and Kavod, come on, it's not exactly the same. It's a play on words. So first of all, in Torah, we're always finding a play on words. But 19, the number 19 is the number of Malchus. The person who represents Malchus is Chava. She's the first woman. Malchus is feminine. And Chava's Gematria 19. And in the Chassidus, you'll see that all over Yud-Tes, that's the idea of Yud-Tes Kislev, and so on and so forth. It's all the final rectification of Malchus. So Malchus, and Yud-Tes Kislev is shaykh to the family of Malchus Beis David. So coronation and COVID-19, and that's the word we're hearing, meaning that is the most pertinent thing. Might not be so popular yet, but that is where the world is trending, and that is where the Eibishter's world is trending, and that's where we have to get to. Now, sometimes people, hear the notion of Kabbalah Samalchus and being Makabal the Melech and coronation, and it almost some people treat it as if it was like it's an easy way out. It's a frivolous kind of a thing. It's like there's the hard work. Even those who want to really tune into what the Rebbe was asking us for Mashiach, so we're more comfortable with the idea of having to personally live in a Mashiach world and have a Geula Pratis. There is no question that that's part of the Avodah. Kabbalah's Pnei Mashiach means a very deep personal Avodah of taking Mashiach very seriously and changing our entire mindset and living in a Mashiach consciousness and a Mashiach awareness, and everything we do should be that how we would do these things in Yemaisa Mashiach. We can start doing them now because, as the Rebbe says, Mashiach is here already. We just have to open our eyes and experience it, just push it in the tangible material. But we can make that happen by us living that way. So that is something that people are more comfortable with. It makes more sense. But the idea that we're turning to someone and asking them, and hopefully, they should kind of, whisk us out of our tzaddis, to many people sounds superficial or sounds frivolous or escapist kind of a nature, and not like the ultimate depth of what it means to be Makabel Pnei Mashiach Tzidkenu. I think that is incorrect. The Rebbe in the Sikha that I Bashgacha Pratis, I wasn't aware of the Sikha till this Sunday. I was teaching a Maimer, one Maimer, and then in the footnotes the Rebbe's Metzayin to this Sikha. So I went and I looked up the Sikha. I don't remember learning the Sikha before. It's a Shavuos Sikha in Chelik Ches, in Lakutei Sikhas. And over there the Rebbe is talking about the idea of Shavuos being associated with Moshe Rabbeinu and David HaMelech. I think it goes on to, I didn't learn the whole Sikha right now, but I think it goes on to speak about Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, why Shavuos is connected to these three people. There's a few Sikhas of the Rebbe about it, but this is one of them. And in the Rebbe's explanation of, the essence of Shavuos is Matan Torah. So we have to say that these personalities are shaykh to the etzem inyan of Matan Torah. What's the idea of Matan Torah? As we know in Chassidus, that the ikar inyan of Matan Torah is the idea of dira b'tachtainim. Through Matan Torah, the Eibishter comes down into this world. El yoinim yerdu l'tachtainim. The upper has to come down lower, which means the chibur, the attachment of a lakus to this world. The Eibishter and the world unify. How does the Eibishter unify with the world? First, the Eibishter unifies with us. With our neshama, Hashem is unified to begin with, but Hashem wants to become unified in our nefesh bahamas and in our guf. And through our nefesh bahamas and in our guf and our makom ba'olam, the Eibishter then is thereby, as a result of that, unified with the entire world until we make the entire world that the entire world becomes filled with knowledge of Hashem, and the whole world becomes adira lo yizbarach. And so the beginning of the real breakthrough, the beginning of dira b'tachtainim happens by Matan Torah. Till then it wasn't possible. But over there the Rebbe says a fascinating thing, that the ikar inyan of Yeridas al Yainim Lamata, the descent of the world, of a lakus coming down into the world, reached its climax by Matan Torah. It didn't start by Matan Torah. It started already with Avram Avinu. It was a process of 7 generations. Avram Avinu's days, when Avram started proclaiming Hashem as the master of the world, and his ideas started to become publicized, and people started listening. So then already we started the process of bringing godliness in a visible way into this world. But it took 7 generations until Vayeded Hashem al Har Sinai, until the Eibishter penetrated all the way into the Gashmias of this world. That the very physicality itself was experienced the truth of the Eibishter. The Rebbe says that's only phase 1. Phase 2 is even after the world is filled with godly light, but that doesn't mean that it's the nature of the world to be godly. The nature of the world is still bent into itself. It feels itself, it knows its own mitzias. It's still an entity of klipa, it's still an entity. It's only that it happens to be that something bigger than it and stronger than it is overwhelming it and silencing it and overpowering it. But if you take the world and leave it back to its own natural state, it will still claim its own mitzias, that it's a mitzias separated from Hashem. That's why the next phase of Matan Torah, to achieve the ultimate chibur, is that the world has to become a keli for Elokos. In other words, it becomes the nature and it becomes the identity of the world, that it is mechuber, it is attached to Elokus, and not only that, Elokus is its entire identity. So the Rebbe says, however, that started at Matan Torah, but it did not reach its final state until David HaMelech. When David HaMelech became king, that's when we reached the completion of the second phase of Matan Torah, which is Tachtoinim Yadol Al Yonim, that the Tachtoin, the world, the material, the physical, should rise up, which means it should become refined and elevated and become that it recognizes Hashem as its true existence, as its true Metzias. And the Rebbe says, why in the days of David HaMelech? What happened in the days of Melech? And the Rebbe points to two fascinating things. One is the more common understanding, and that is that David HaMelech built a Beis HaMikdash. So the building of the Beis HaMikdash represents that Gashmius is a keli for Elokus. The Beis HaMikdash was a keli to receive godliness, and it's even more than the Mishkan. Because even though the Mishkan was a dwelling place for Hashem, but the holiness of the Mishkan did not stay in that place. It moved from place to place, which means that the essential space of the Mishkan did not become holy. And that's showing that the holiness and the material did not merge completely, or else it would remain forever. The fact that it moved from place to place is a sign that it never really caught on. It didn't become one with it. But in the Beis HaMikdash, once we built the Beis HaMikdash, even if the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed, that place is eternally holy. That means place that the physicality of the space itself, of the Harabayas, is unified with Elokus, with Gatlichkeit. So that's the Beis HaMikdash. But then the Rebbe says, there's another Inyan that was in the days of David HaMelech. He actually says that that's the first Inyan. He says the very idea that we had a Melech. Until that time, even though we had a Melech, we started a Malchus with Shaul Melech, but Shaul is not meant to be the eternal Malchus of the Jewish people. So when did we establish the firm empire of the Jewish people and a real Melech? That happened Dafka through David HaMelech. David Melech Yisrael. He's the eternal king of the Jewish people, him and his descendants, and eventually it's going to be David Malka Moshiach Tzidkenu, who's going to be the culmination of David HaMelech. Now what's the Chiddush over here? The Rebbe says that the Etzem Inyan that we established a Malchus of the Eibishter in this world through the Malchus based David is the completion of the Chibur and the attachment of the world with Hashem. Why? So the Rebbe says like this. The very notion, in other words, my question is, or the Rebbe's question is, what in terms of the attachment of the world to Hashem was added by the fact that we, the Jewish people, had a Jewish king? Meaning, what was lacking by Matan Torah that was achieved through David HaMelech's Malchus? And the Rebbe says it's simple. When a Yid is in violation of Torah, it does not destroy his Metzias. In other words, the Jew doesn't lose his existence by misaligning with Torah, by disconnecting from Torah. Now, of course, there are Avedas. We know there's Chayv Kares, Chas v'Shalom, person's neshama gets cut off, it's a very serious sin. There are other sins that is Chayv Misa. In other words, there are certain violations of Torah that cost the person their existence, their life. Sometimes even there's a kind of spiritual existence, the idea that the union of Kares and so on and so forth. But the Rebbe says, but that's not because you're disconnecting from the Torah. What's the proof? The very notion that there are Averis that a person can just get some lashes for, that means they can survive the detachment. As they detached from the Eibishter and they can live life. They get some consequences. And there are certain things that you get a monetary fine, right? You have to pay a fine. And there are certain things, you don't even have that. It's an Aveda, it's a blemish. But there is no punishment that eradicates your existence. So what does that show? That the connection is not, that doesn't define your very beingness. The fact that you can disconnect and still be is a sign that your connection is not the very you. Because if it's the very you, the moment you're disconnected, there is no you. Torah, when the Eibishter gave us the Torah, and the fact that we received the Torah, but the consequences that come out of listening or not listening from the Torah is one that does not affect our very beingness. It affects elements about us, but not our very being, means that our connection to the Eibishter is not complete. It's not thorough. It's not our entire Metzias. That means that the Tachta in the world and the Eibishter have not become totally one. But the Rebbe says, what's the idea of a melech? When you accept a melech, and he's your king, the law of a melech is that when he tells you to do something and you disobey, then the king has the right to chas v'shalom, end the person's life. And over here, it doesn't make a difference what the king is saying. In other words, if what you disobeyed his law is something very severe, something that you can understand is threatening, the person spied for the enemy or something like that, you committed treason. Or it can be the tiniest thing, the king tells you to, wear that particular color shoelaces. It won't impact anything in his kingdom, whether yes or you don't. But yet, the very fact that he told you specifically to do something, you don't do it. Hapach HaChaim is the opposite of life. Now the Rebbe says the reason is because kingship, the king and the people are bond together at the very mitzias. The king owns, so to speak, your entire existence. The shibud, the subservience of the servant to the king, of the subject to the king, is in your entire essence. And automatically, if your very identity is that you are a subject to the king, then obviously it's also going to define every aspashtus of you, every element of you. And even the most minor disconnect, since it's a disconnect of in that area, it's a disconnecting of the king, then it's a severance, and that severance brings about an end to the person's entire mitzvahs. So therefore the Rebbe says, the chiddush of us having a Jewish king was that now our commitment to the Eibishter is through the attribute of Malchus, which means it permeates our entire existence, from our inner nucleus, from our very, very identity of I am. Our entire existence is completely ibrigigem and connected to the Eibishter. Now, I know halachically, there's no, that after David the Melech became king, it's not like all the punishments of Torah changed. That now, if you violate the smallest thing, a person eats something that's maybe not kosher, it's not that chas v'shalom they lose their life for it. So the Rebbe doesn't say that now every little minor infraction of violation of Torah costs a person a life, because the king himself, the Melech, as David the Melech, did not tell you each thing in Shulchan Aruch, do this or do that. But in emes, in truth, the Rebbe says, what's the king's job? The king's job is that people should follow the Torah mitzvahs. That's his main. His establishment is the Kabbalist. You're makabel the human king, and the human king is really the facilitator of the godly kingdom. So now you're Torah mitzvahs and in a manner of accepting the Eibishter as your king. Now, even though you're accepting the human king, and not the Eibishter, but the Rebbe explains, that's what the Tzemach Tzedek says, that we understand that the Kabbalah HaMalchus of the human king is nothing other than the Kabbalah of the Eibishter as a king. And even deeper than that, why couldn't we have the Kabbalah HaMalchus already by Matan Torah? In a sense, Matan Torah sometimes is called Kabbalah HaMalchus. We accepted the Eibishter's kingdom. So why couldn't that suffice as a real Kabbalah HaMalchus? And which would mean that our Ibigegebenkeit, our connection to the king is one of essence. The Rebbe says the reason we couldn't is because, the Rebbe doesn't say this specifically in the Sikha, but this is what it says in Derech Mitzvah, is that since Kabbalah HaMalchus is negei, a very etzem HaMetzias, and it has to be you're giving yourself over with kol muhuscha, with your entire substance of being, your entire identity is to the king. You can't do that to an abstract king, to a king that you can't see, you can't touch, you don't have a tangible vision of him. You can't make such an absolute subservience. In order to be meshabed yourself completely to the Melech has to be very, very real to you. And a human king, we can have that bittul to. But the human king is not chas v'shalom an entity on his own. The human king experiences the Eibishter. To him, the Eibishter is very real, like a tangible entity. In other words, he sees the Eibishter. And by David HaMelech, especially the quality of his neshama is tachlis habitl. So in his neshama is mislabish the Eibishter's malchus. And therefore, when we are bottled to him, we're bottled to the Eibishter in a manner of malchus. And in that manner of malchus, it's affecting us at our very core, at our very etzem, and our very. And therefore, dafke through malchus, our chibur with the Eibishter is betachlis, is completely envelops our entire being, both our ispashtus, our expansion, and also our etzem, our essence. Therefore, we can understand this was back then, but that was kind of a trial run. In other words, we accomplished it. We reached by David HaMelech the max, but that was a trial run because it wasn't yet in play to affect the entire world. Then we spread out in the Golos, and the Kadal Machos Beit David kind of falls apart, at least Bechitzanias, externally. And we go in to fix the entire world and do all the Avodah, Berudim, and so on and so forth. And then, as we come to the end, we have to re-establish the Malchus of the Eibishter, re-invite the Eibishter to the world. But the completion of that re-invitation and reconnection to the Eibishter to the world is completed through David Malka Mashiach, through our acceptance of Melech HaMashiach. So what do we see by the Rebbe? We see that even though all the other Rabbeim, Chassidim, were devoted to them, belev v'nefesh. What would a Chassid not do for the Alter Rebbe, for the Mittler Rebbe, for the Tzemach Tzedek, for the Rebbe Marash, for the Rebbe Rashab, the Friedige Rebbe, Chassidim and the Mesiras Nefesh? They gave the Rebbeim their all. But you can see, Bepash, this is my own thought, that you can see that even though they were Batal B'tachas HaBittul, but it's not like them and their entire existence was totally the Rebbe's, because Chassidus was mainly directed to the man. And there was a Chassid was a man. Obviously, his wife was married to a Chassid, so the Chassidus spilled over into her. But it wasn't like mishpacha, with Chassidish families. But the Iker Inyan was the man. He came to hear Chassidus from the Rebbe, and he davened ba'avodah, and he integrated, and he lived like Chassidish Yid, and for the Rebbe, he was willing to do everything. Dafken Doira Shvi by the Rebbe. The Rebbe's Chassidim, the Rebbe took each and every one of us, and he took our entire existence. He owned our businesses, he owned our homes, he owned our families. It's the whole entire mitzias of the person, because the Rebbe is Malchus, and Malchus is all inclusive, everything about us. And obviously that already happened on UFG. But now, when we have to be ma'oided again, the final gilui of Melech HaMashiach. So this idea of doing a Kabbalah Samalchus is not a fun thing that we're doing, or let's just do this and let's give Mashiach, let's get over with it, let's have Mashiach here. We're talking about something very deep and very powerful. We're talking about bringing ourselves to the same place Chassidim were UFG, but this time even deeper than that, and to give ourselves over as our entire mitzias, everything we own, everything we have, every moment of our time, every moment, every breath that we have, is we breathe and we live for our King. And in that itself expresses tachlis of unification of us and the Eibishter la'ad v'lanetzach netzach. So how fortunate are those who are zeicha to be the inspirers of everyone else, because this is going to happen, because the world is one with the Eibishter after all of the Torah mitzvahs we've done. It just has to come begilui. And this Kabbalah Samalchus is the gilui of the sum totality of all of our avodah, and driving it all home and bringing it all out into the open. May we merit his galus. Take it from me, Mamish.